Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our latest Time of the Month podcast. I'm Linda Pollock, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to Sanctuary First. And today we're going to be looking at Jael and her meal. And I want to welcome my co-host Laura Dagan. Hello Laura, how are you?
Hello, well, I am very well, thank you. I had COVID a couple of weeks ago, and I'm now on the mend. So, so just trying not to do too much, but it doesn't seem to be working out that way.
Well, I'll say to you what I say to myself time and time again, which is just a nonsense, but I say it anyway. What's the quality of your yes if you never say no?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is
that on your wall. Every wall in the house. It doesn't make a bit of difference. But we're glad you're here, Laura, and with your new hairdo, looking lovely as ever. And our special guest, a very, very warm welcome return to Ruth Forsyth. Ruth, welcome. We're glad you're here. Why don't you tell our listeners a wee bit about yourself, please?
Great. Well, good to see you both again, and lovely to be back and having another interesting discussion with you both. So I'm Ruth Forsyth, and I am an ordained local minister in Glasgow Presbytery. My role is entitled Spiritual Formation Advisor. So I run retreats, I do spiritual accompaniment, I run a book group and meet with people either in groups or individually to talk about our spiritual growth and our spiritual formation. That's what I do in my spare time. In my full-time job, I'm the Community Development Director at Finn's Place, which is a community wellbeing project that started at Langside Parish Church on the south side of Glasgow. So that's what I do for my working hours, and then I do other things in my free time. So it's lovely to be with you again today, ladies.
Well, we're glad you're here. And Ruth, what do you do to relax when you're doing all that other stuff?
Well, sometimes I just sit in my conservatory and look out into the garden and just enjoy the peace and the quiet. I do like our conservatory. It's great. It's such a nice bright space. I go for walks when I can. We live just a minute or two from the Clyde Walkway in Glasgow, so it's nice just to get out there and walk alongside the river. And then occasionally we go a bit further afield and tend to walk quite a bit with my husband. So yeah, walking mostly. I'm not really into an awful lot of other physical activity, but I do like to walk and get out in the fresh air.
That's wonderful. Well, we're glad you're here. And friends, we're going to ask Laura now to give us a wee brief summary of our story today. It's about a woman called Jael. And Laura, go for it.
Yes, so you can find the full story of Jael in Judges 4. People that are regular listeners will know that I have a particular fondness for the book of Judges. Yes, so and it begins with Deborah. We do need to talk about Deborah briefly. Because Deborah, the prophetess and judge, she's advised Barak to do battle against King Jabin of Canaan. But Barak's a wee bit afeard, and he says that he'll go as long as Deborah goes along with him. And so Deborah says, yes, I'll go, but this means that actually the honour of defeating Jabin's army will go to a woman. So he's probably heading off thinking, don't know if that's going to really be the case. But they have a battle, and Sisera, who has been leading the king's army, once they've been defeated by Barak's warriors, Sisera from the king's army, he flees after all the other Canaanites have been killed off and defeated, and he flees, and then he comes to a tent which he thinks, oh, this is okay, I can come here because these people have got a kind of friendship agreement with Jabin the king. So this is Heber and his wife Jael. So I'm assuming that Heber's not there. So Jael invites him in. She welcomes him in. He's asking for some safety. She gets them all relaxed. She covers them up with a blanket. He asks for a drink of water, but she gives him milk instead. And then whenever he's, all relaxed, he asks her to watch over the tent. And then she takes a mallet and drives a tent peg through his temple into the ground while he's sleeping, killing him instantly. So yes, it's quite gruesome. But that is she then, as prophesied by Deborah, has been the one to defeat the army.
That's wonderful. Thanks for that summary. And remember, it's the book of Judges, chapter 4, and go into chapter 5 as well, because the same story is repeated only via a song that Deborah sings. Ruth, what jumped out at you when you read this story?
Well, I suppose a couple of things. First is it's obviously set in a very different time and place and different values and different expectations, but also it's a time of war. So this is not your regular everyday life. This is a time of war. And it's interesting that, in scripture, there are lots of different times of war and times of conflict, and yet there is no real guidance as to how we should behave in those kinds of times. So, and it seems to be that certain things are accepted and understood in times of war that are different to other times. So we wouldn't expect Jael to have performed this act at any other time, but it fitted because it was a time of war, and she obviously took a side and acted out, and her action favoured the people of Israel. I suppose another thing was that if we think of it as a time of war, we tend not to think of women involved in warfare. And it's only fairly recently that women are now engaged in the front line in warfare in certain countries. When I was in my teens, I had this dream of joining the Royal Navy. And of course, at that time, women wouldn't even have been on ships. They would have been all on land-based sites. And they would not have been involved in any kind of conflict situation at all. So I suppose those were the two things that stuck out to me, that this is a situation of war, and so therefore certain things were acceptable and understood, and also that it was unexpected that Jael would take action in a situation of warfare, and her action then favoured the people of Israel.
That's really helpful. One of the things that I'll piggyback on is Jael was considered to be a Canaanite, which is what her husband's background was, a descendant of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. And Canaanite wasn't an Israelite. And reading some of the Jewish commentaries, they were saying that maybe she was an Israelite, but she'd converted to her husband's faith tradition, which of course is the norm in those ancient days and still today, I suppose. But she was also compared to Rahab, who was a foreigner, and yet who took the side of the Israelites against the enemy. I think the other thing that I would piggyback on that you said was about Jael doing something unusual for a woman to take up arms and to slaughter the man, and particularly in the context where she, according to the text, went out and welcomed him into her tent. And it was her tent, not her husband in her tent, but her tent. And she brought him in. So she violated all the hospitality laws of that community. And that was really interesting to me, that for the bigger cause, for the greater good, question mark, she violated the hospitality laws. Anyway, that's something that touched me. Laura, anything you'd like to jump in on or piggyback on?
Yeah, so I think for me the big question was why did she kill Sisera? Considering there was this alliance, where husband's tribe and king, and so I did wonder. I thought, is she a foreigner? Is she an Israelite? Why would you do it? And then I was thinking again. I was thinking, well, like as Ruth said, this is a time of war. And you're thinking, is she actually worried about her own physical safety? And you think about how in war, so often rape is used against women. And I wonder if she's thought, well, I'm going to get you first before you can get me.
Oh,
and because as well, it's very, the fact that it's, it's the tent peg, which could be seen as, like phallic, and it's this symbol, or perhaps, and we don't know, again, I'm reading into this, perhaps she has experienced some kind of trauma before, and again, it's just this, right, well, I'm reacting, you're not going to hurt me. And the fact it's this tent peg, and it's and it's getting driven in. But what else? What I thought was interesting as well, and this kind of came into some of the reading I was doing. This kind of so Deborah's kind of seen as like the good mother, a kind of good mother symbol, and Jael is this bad mother symbol. She's covered him up, she's given him milk, and then it's like, oh, and then I'm going to kill him. And I thought that was quite interesting. But then it's like, but women are more than mothers, so, and I felt as if that was, perhaps that commentator was actually not fully taking into account who Deborah was, the fullness of Deborah, by just kind of making her like the good mother image, and Jael the bad mother.
It's like the vilification of women again, isn't it? You're either a sex mad woman, or you're a wonderful mother, because later on, if you read the chapter 5 of Judges, some of the language suggests that she was inviting him in for sexual reasons, and that the word for blanket or rug is not awfully clear. It's only used here. And some folks say that it may have been that she lay on top of him. So again, it's sex or motherhood, and that concerns me. And the language again used there when she has killed him, he is between her feet.
Yes.
So further adding to the whole notion of the sexualization of this act. Ruth, have you anything you'd like to throw in there?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I read was that putting up the tents was the women's job.
Yeah.
And so handling a mallet and a tent peg would have been second nature to Jael, especially if they were a nomadic kind of people. And so these would have been the tools of her regular life. So it wasn't that she took up arms, but she used what she normally would have used in her life. And so she would have had the strength to hit a good, a tent peg a good distance into the ground to hold the tent up. If you've gone camping and used old, tent pegs, that they have to go in fairly deeply in order to hold the tent against the wind. But I think as well, there's something about the subversive nature of what she does, and because she gives the appearance of welcome, but then in the end kills him. And I think very often it's people who are vulnerable, who need to use that approach to protect themselves or to do whatever they need to do. So, and very often it's people need to be subversive in those kind of situations. So you find it in kind of cultures where people are oppressed, like in the former Soviet Union, people would be subversive in how they would deal with the powers that be and with the oppression that they're dealing with. And very often women who are in situations of danger will use a subversive approach in order to deal with the danger of being attacked or killed. And I was just very recent, just today actually, I just read in passing a sentence in a book that a woman saying no, and I'm paraphrasing here, a woman saying no looks death in the face. And so, if you're thinking of this as Jael being a vulnerable woman with this commander of the army coming into her tent, her own personal tent, then it was a situation of possible danger for her. And so her subversive behavior was, yes, welcome him in, but then when he's vulnerable, then, I will make my move to protect myself. And if she had some kind of allegiance to Israel, then it would be her act, to support the cause of Israel. So I thought it was an interesting take on the story, that it was a subversive nature of it. And we can't use our moral judgments today, to to criticize that, because again, as we say, it was a situation of conflict and war. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that, because if you look on again in chapter 5, where Sisera's mother is at home with her handmaid, and they're talking, where is he? It's taking him so long? And the mother says, oh, he's probably sharing out the booty, the spoils of war, and no doubt he's sharing out the wounds of the women as well, depending which translation you read.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, that's again the vulnerability of women in war, where rape is used constantly, and where women have to be subversive in how they behave. And so the heroic nature of Jael's behaviour, I believe, in part lies with the fact, maybe not that she necessarily helped Israel out, but that she protected women from being raped by the likes of this man, Sisera. And what makes it even more hard for me to stomach is that the mommy thinks this is normal.
Yes.
Thinks this is the norm. And I wonder, even today, do other women think this is the norm? Do the women who are on the perceived victor's side believe this is okay? Look at South Sudan. Look at what was going on in the Slavic conflict as well. You know, the women that were raped there, the Islamic women, God help them. You know, so I wonder how old is this text? It's one of the oldest texts that we have ever. And still the patterns are happening again and again and again. Still, we women are colluding with our so-called male victors.
Yeah, I was thinking another thing, there are other stories in scripture where women act in this subversive way and give the appearance of one thing, but then kind of come in with the kind of sting in the tail, if you like. So one of them is Tamar and Judah. You know, so Tamar is subversive in that she tricks Judah into coming into her tent, and then she calls him out on his lack of commitment to her family. And the other one is, of course, Esther, who in a subversive way withdraws Haman in, because this is the only means of engaging that women had. To do a full-face frontal attack is not possible for women, and so they have to use this method of subversion in order to engage with those who are threatening their livelihood or their family.
I think subversion is something in the Christian tradition that is rich and wonderful. I think of somebody like Daniel Berrigan or William Stringfellow, Thomas Merton, these great people, Dorothy Day, from the 60s, 50s, 60s and 70s. And I will ask myself, where is the subversion for us today? We're all part of the Church of Scotland. We're going through tremendous change. I won't say necessarily it's all good, but I would ask, where's the subversion? Because a lot of what's going on is not being handled well. A lot of ministers are being crippled, and congregations are closing, and people's hearts are being broken. And I wonder, is there room for subversion? I had
met my friend George this morning, and actually we were talking about this because I had been at a presbytery meeting last night, and I was talking about this this feeling actually of sadness throughout the church, without the Church of Scotland, and a feeling of actually there's a poverty kind of mindset, you know, and a spirit of like, actually collusion with that poverty mindset that I think has taken hold. And I was saying to George, I says, do you know, the only thing that I can do is actually say, anytime I'm in this, is actually to speak out and be like, I don't believe that the church is dying. I don't believe that it's diminishing. You know, I'm breathing, you know, and like I'm actually going to be speaking out for growth and actually people to get excited about knowing again. That's it. I thought that is the only thing that I can do. And I thought, well, you know, if I'm the only voice, you know, actually it might give courage to other people as well. But we have to actually kind of speak out against this mindset that has just befallen the whole of the church. And it is because it's bringing ministers down, it's bringing everybody down with it. And it's as if like, you just think, well, oh, what's the point? Well, the point is like the Lord has put us here, you know. We are his church, so we're not dead. We're his church. You're getting me started. Oh no.
Ruth, voice of reason, perhaps.
It's so I think, you know, to actually like breathe into that as subversive, then to actually like be on the actual other side and use your voice and trying to actually change the atmosphere, change the spirit, you know.
What do you think, Ruth?
I suppose, yes, I think you're right, Laura. I think sometimes we have to question the kind of general direction that everything seems to be going in. But I think as well, we sometimes need to recognize that we sometimes depend a lot on structures to keep things going when actually things can keep going sometimes without the structures that we've become used to. So it depends on how much we rely on the structures to enable us to keep going and do ministry. Whereas ministry can take place in any way, with or without the structure. So we can continue with ministry. I mean, I minister, without any kind of structure in many ways. I'm a part of the Church of Scotland in that sense, but I'm not dependent on the Church of Scotland for my ministry to take place. I would minister in the way that I do, whether or not I was a part of the Church of Scotland. And I think that's what's subversive, so that we can continue to minister and then we can create the structures that are necessary or change the structure as necessary to enable the ministry to take place. Rather than saying that the ministry can only take place if the structure is such and such and such and such. So it's a kind of a back to front way of looking at it. We will continue with ministry, but what do we need to do with the structures to enable that ministry to continue? Rather than saying, let's change the structure in order for the ministry to continue. So it's just a slightly different way of viewing it, and it comes kind of at it from a different angle. But I think as well, if we think about this idea of women in warfare and being subversive, you just need to do a quick look online for, women spies in World War II or something like that, and you find that this was a role that women were particularly good at because the enemy didn't expect women to be involved in warfare. And so it was the unexpected element of it as well that enabled women in World War II to infiltrate into German intelligence and gather the intelligence that was needed for the Allied forces. So it was the unexpected. So it's doing being the unexpected person in the room. And sometimes, of course, women have been excluded from the room in many, many different situations. So it's whenever you are that unexpected person in the room, what can you do to subvert what might be the kind of overarching view of things and present a different view on what is actually happening?
I think I'm drawn to the stories of Jesus about subversion. Well, two of them anyway, when he says, turn the other cheek. I mean, that's subversion in the most positive way possible. And then walk the extra mile. That kind of subversion where you're not damaging, or you're not setting out to wound intentionally with a tent peg, but you're starting up and you're saying, well, here's an alternative. Come on, I can do this. And that's so much harder because you're suggesting, and what you've just said there, you're suggesting that you work within the constraints of the structure that we have, as opposed to going out. And I think that's the whole nature of subversion, isn't it? Rather than to step outside the structure and start up something else, you stay within the structure and you change it. And I think history teaches that most change doesn't come from within an organization. People have to leave, I think. Somebody told me that, who's very clever, and I believed him. But I have to say, well, where's the Spirit of God? Where's the Spirit of God urging us to be within this place that we believe what we're called to be in? And even though it might feel like a straitjacket in many ways, we, and especially women, we women are good at being subversive because it's part of our nature as women, because we are often unseen, unheard, and pushed to the margins. And I wonder how many of us women would be willing to stand up and make a difference, stand up and and be vilified as a mother or a whore, for the sake of the kingdom. Anyway, but I'm also minded of this story too, the whole area around shame in women, and how for a man to be killed by a woman, it's shameful. And that just blows my mind. And it reminds me, do you remember a couple of years ago when Kurdish women were on the front line fighting ISIS?
Yes.
And the whole idea was for them to kill what they call Daesh, the men at the front line, and to take the sting out of the whole victory of, we're going to have 15 virgins in heaven because we've done this, And I love that whole idea, because there's subversion again. And it's subversion because they're imposing an identity upon Jael as a woman who has shamed Barak, as opposed to saying, well, Barak, you're the one that was the feeble leader, So again, it's subverting and turning it all upside down again. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, because and I find it quite, because I think we did speak about this when we spoke about Deborah, originally, because it's in, like, he's very much defers to Deborah, Barak, but actually you think, well, because he defers to Deborah, why should it then be like a bad thing that a woman then takes credit, for the defeat of the army, because it's like, well, that I've got an issue with, because Deborah was obviously a woman of wisdom, great wisdom, and he must have felt like her powerful presence, and thought, well, I want to take that presence with me, whenever we go into battle. There's nothing wrong with that.
But is that going back to the whole idea, there's my mommy Deborah, the good mommy, and there's my the other mommy who's actually a bad slip of a
But if we were thinking about, if we were actually like being open-minded about it, it could well be that he just sees the strength in Deborah, and he wants to have her beside him, and there's nothing wrong with that, to actually want that. But this text is definitely, kind of, I think, going into that, well, it's shameful to have your mammy come along with you.
Ruth, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I was just looking at the text there, and it just tells us that Deborah sent for Barak, and it doesn't say anything more about him. It just says he was a son of Abinoam from the city of Kadesh in Naphtali, and it doesn't say that he was a soldier. It doesn't say who he was. It doesn't say what his background was, and I don't know if it says anywhere else that he had already been, a commander in the army or something like that. But I just wonder, excuse me, I just wonder, did he already have experience of battle or not?
Yeah.
And was there any shame in saying, I'd like you to come with me? Was that shameful for him to say, I'd like you to come with me? What's wrong with that?
Yeah, exactly.
But I looked up another article and talked about strong women and wimpy men, as if that was the only two options, strong women or wimpy men. And maybe it's okay to ask for help and say, I'd like you to come with me and do it.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of today in the church, when male colleagues that I went through university with, and 20 years later, other women are in positions of authority in the Church of Scotland, and my male colleagues will roll their eyes and say, that's just her, that's who she was, she needed all that power. And again, it's either you're a meek, mild, submissive woman in ministry, or you're just a power-crazed woman that needs it, It's interesting extremes. It's just this whole binary thinking again, isn't it?
Yeah.
But sorry,
what's interesting actually is I had when I was looking online, I seen that Jael is actually one of the most popular contemporary names in Israel. Yeah.
Well, they say Jael. Jael, I think they say.
Yeah, and you think, well, because I think originally it means like it's to do with like a wee goat, isn't it? Like climbing. And so You think, oh, that's like interesting that they want to, use that name. But they're obviously, kind of channeling this powerful, a powerful woman. And because if you look at, a lot of the art, from the Renaissance time and before that, and, Jael is like a kind of powerful woman, and she kind of falls into that, that idea of a powerful woman. And so you can see why then that people, nowadays would want to name their daughter after a powerful woman, because it's like, right, it's like, this is what you can be. You're a powerful woman.
Yeah. I mean, I think the same is true in a lot of Christian circles. We name our daughters and after the stories of good women in the Bible and women who have been seen in a good light. I don't think I know anybody called Jezebel, but I know lots of people called Deborah and Esther. Haven't met anybody called Jael yet, but and I'm called Ruth, obviously. So we do use those names. I called my daughter Abigail, so these are names of women who have whose story is significant in scripture. And so that's what we want to use. We want to use these as a sign of this. These are significant women and their stories are important and they made a contribution. They weren't just sitting on the sidelines and letting the world go by,
Remembering the text from Sunday, salt, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. And I'm thinking this is who Jesus named us. Before we handed our lives to him, he named us that already. It's like Mary before, when the angel Gabriel came and greeted her, before he said, "Hiya, Mary," he said, "Greetings, favoured one." That was how he named her. And I think it might be interesting someday for us women, a group of us women, to get together and say, well, Laura, I want to say that your name is Jael, because you are mighty in power, blah, 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 blah. I think it would be an interesting exercise for us to do and talk about what we would name each other as a way of affirming one another, and maybe as a way of saying, here's what I see in you that you can't see in yourself, the way Jesus saw us as salt, as light. And that might be for us to, I think with young girls especially, when we're doing group work with them or confirmation work with them. And then of course there's, well, Ruth and I have been talking about this before, about our true name before God, and that's a whole nother podcast. But I realize our time's marching on, and I wonder, in terms of the modern day, anything about women in the news coming up that grabs your attention, girls?
I have to say I was shocked and appalled by that policeman, David Carrick, and the amount of rape and sexual assault that he was allowed to get away with for so long, and that you think people knew he was not right. They knew, people that he worked with, and this collusion, which I think is very unsavoury. And so I was thinking about him when I was reading Jael, and I was thinking about the mallet and the peck, and it's like, what do women have to do to be safe? Especially when you're thinking people who actually you should be able to trust, and he's abused that trust, and so it doesn't surprise me then that women have to be subversive in how they protect themselves.
Ruth, anything come to your mind this week?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Laura. I think I was just going through Twitter earlier, and I came across a picture of one of these newspapers online, and kind of the top 8 headlines, 7 of them were all about men who had killed or abused or in some way or another caused women harm. And these are the top stories in a current newspaper just today. And I just think we just don't realize how difficult it is for many women. And even though our society gives lip service to equality, very often in so many, it almost seem insignificant ways, women are diminished and undermined, and their contribution is negated and ignored. And it's hard to make people who don't experience that, to make people realize how debilitating that can be for women, and how difficult that can be just to make your everyday life. It's like those who face racism and, incipient racism and little acts throughout the day. And the same thing is true of women who face it in just throwaway comments, or, so for example, I was preaching in a church a couple of weeks ago, and just in the assumptions that we can make all the time. And so I said at the end of the service, I couldn't stay for tea and coffee because my husband was the session clerk and he was going to a meeting in the afternoon. And so the lady who introduced me said that I had to go home and make my husband's dinner before he could go out to go to this meeting. And actually, my husband does most of the cooking, so she got that wrong. But it was just that general assumption, and I think we make those assumptions all the time, and we just forget that people are more than their sex, or their gender or whatever, and they have a huge contribution to make. And it's easy as well when we meet people who are retired to forget that they have a contribution to make, because they have a whole life experience to bring to situations, And so again, I was listening, the Chancellor wants people over 50 to go back into work, and yet the ageism in the workplace is the biggest inequality that people face. So trying to get a job if you're over 55 is really, really difficult, because people will take a younger person. So it's just these kind of general assumptions that we make about people, that Jael, a normal woman who just normally puts up the tent and does what she has to do, couldn't kill the commander of an army, but she did. And that women cannot do certain things, and yet they do. And very often, many women do push through and get to do what they feel called to do, or what their dream is and their desire is. But for many women, it just doesn't work out like that. So it's a real challenge for us, isn't it, to think about those things?
Well, I want to end on two happy, upbeat stories about women, because like you, I've been listening, and that whole thing about African American women and depression really disturbed me when I was reading it this week. And their symptoms are so much different to Caucasian women. But that's not what I want to end with. I want to end with two things. First of all, Apelia. This is the first time ever this year that girls have been allowed to be involved in that. And I think that's wonderful. Go girls up there in Shetland and learning their history, and not just being the women that go back to the clubs and make the tea and coffee. So let's put that on the agenda. And the second thing is, in Gaza, for the first time in history, in Gaza, an all-women's boxing club now has a place to meet, a professional gym. For years, they've been on the beach or in garages, but now, God bless them, they're learning how to box. And woe betide anybody that would get in their way and try to speak little mild women who are going to make the hummus, and that'll be you. They'll end up in their back, knocked out to be a right hook, maybe. But the violence aside, it's wonderful that here are women and girls who are being offered an opportunity to do something that's not the norm, to take on the mantle of human being made in the image of God, beloved child, as opposed to a wee girl, young woman, sitting. If you're in Afghanistan, don't learn anything in school, don't go to school, don't do anything. Your identity is no longer imposed upon you. In this Gaza boxing club, you can be who your instincts, your spirit of God in you, whatever label you want to put on that, who God is calling you and inviting you to be. So I think that's two happy stories to end on a very happy, and I use that word intentionally, happy, because I think it's important that we don't label the Jael and her Neil story as a negative. It's a very positive. And instead of saying heroic, I would say she-roic.
Heroic.
Let's have a shero instead of a hero. Let's own our womanhood, our femininity, and let's celebrate that God made us in God's image, in their image, male and female. And let's celebrate that and continue to be subversive, continue to, with the grace of God, make a difference. So thanks, ladies. A wee quick farewell from you both.
Bye, everyone.
Yep, great to be with you. Hope to see with you again sometime. Take care, everybody.
We'll look forward to it, Ruth. We'll definitely get you back, and we'll be back in a month or 6 weeks' time. I think our next two heroines are Blandina and Felicitas, I believe. Yes. Two wonderful young women who were martyred in the 1st century. So get your history books out and look them up. And if you, again, any questions, any comments, any disagreements, any affirmations, send us a wee note. And if you want to join us on this conversation in the podcast, give us a wee note and we'll have a blather with you. All are welcome, even if you're a poor soul of a man. And we don't hate men, we love men, we affirm them, but you're welcome also to join us in this too. So cheerio for now, and we'll see you again. All the best. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.